afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this session. No. I didn't know your jingle so well. Now I know it. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming to this session on the future of antibiotics. Is Global South Innovation our best strategy? We have a very interesting panel. I'm going to introduce the speakers when I'm going to ask them questions. And the idea of the panel was to broaden the horizon, to have a couple of different players from different countries, from Thailand, India, South Africa, MSF, who actually has also done some important innovation. We also had invited somebody from Brazil. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it, so not that you believe that we are leaving out Latin America. We don't. And I'm going to ask the different participants about what they have actually done, what they have contributed. And I'm truly excited about it because I learned a lot. And I'm going to start with Dr. Manish Paul, who is the CEO of Microbiome, and he's also the lead co-inventor of N-metazobactam, which I believe is the first innovative antibiotic which was fully developed in India. It was registered with the US FDA, but also in India. And you have, since 2006, I understand, worked on this molecule, really from discovering it to bringing it through the clinical trials, to bring it to the market. And even now you're working with Orchid, the innovator company, on the phase 4 trials and the pediatric program. So, I loved the article you published on an Indian triumph in antimicrobial drug discovery. So we want to hear from you. How did you manage to develop this first new chemical entity invented in India, get it approved, and how painful was your journey? What were the challenges you had to overcome?
It was a pleasurable journey, I must say. Thank you, Peter. Orchid had several anti-infective programs in small molecules like oxazolidinone, cephalosporins. We had metallo-beta-lactamase inhibitor programs. But they are all novel class. And we thought, why don't we look at something which is low-hanging fruit? So that's when the managing director of then Dr. Raghavendra Rao, along with Om Reddy, they all came up with an idea that why don't we look at beta-lactamase inhibitors? And then they saw, through the IP bursting, we had a very beautiful and very powerful IP department headed by Dr. Senthil, and he found that there is one side chain in tazobactam that is free, which we can still manipulate and work around. And that's where he started making many molecules, ethyl, methyl, propyl, allyl, aryl. And they were all having in vitro activities, but nothing ever translated into in vivo. And unless we give life to the molecule by in vivo, the molecule is just a molecule. So that's when we came into picture, the microbiologists, right? And we developed a novel model. That's what is published in the paper. That we should never think like whatever is published and it's there in the textbooks is only way. We have to think outside the box. In this case, now, it is a beta-lactamase which is the target. So make the animals, in the animal experiment, a little more morbid by allowing the dosing interval to be different than what is normally done. And that was the shift which brought life into this molecule. Until then, this program was pretty much on the shelf. And that's the discovery. That's when invention happened. That's where my team with Shakti, Hariharan, these people who worked really hard and they made sure that we got this in vivo translation. And then came about the development, the preclinical development. So the challenges of bringing drug-like properties in the molecule. Right? How do we humanizing the animal models to ensure that the drug is translatable from in vivo animal to human-like drug-like properties? That's when Sridhar Narayanan and his team came about and developed the molecule preclinical models. That was not the end of it, because when would the ROI come in? The management was waiting already by the time 8 years passed, and should we really invest into this low-hanging fruit? Because if it was a novel class, probably they would. It's still not as low-hanging fruit, is not giving any returns. And the battle was always with the management to ensure that they would keep invested in us. So Raghavendra Rao, the managing director, was very keen. He said, no, we will continue to do this program. So he always ensured that we had money to do the studies. And we did all the dog studies and everything, the preclinical development. And then came the clinical trials. Now, how do we do it? Indian companies, it requires a lot of money. So how do we take it forward? That's when we partnered with Allegra Therapeutics. Nicholas Benedict came along. He saw there is a value in this asset. So Orchid owned about 18.5% of the stakes in the company, and we formed that Allegra Therapeutics was formed by them. And there, Stefano Biondi, the medicinal chemist, and Stuart Shapiro, they all worked together to repeat the experiments and find all the characteristics suitable for clinical trials. And they managed to ensure that we completed all 3 clinical phases of clinical trials. But again, the valley of death. Orchid underwent corporate debt restructuring. So it went under a sunken phase. So Orchid lost almost all this, or not almost, it lost all the stakes in the company because as per the German law, it was declared as bankrupt or insolvent. So, but Orchid retained its IP rights. I'm telling all this because how much of a journey it takes for a molecule in a smaller company to come up. And then when Orchid was in insolvency, I again wore the hat of marketing and went around convincing various investors to put money into that as only in this part of the discovery part. And then Dhanukas came about, who own larger industries in India. They bought over Orchid Pharma, and they believed in this molecule as well. And they continue to support it and continuing to support. Now Dhanukas own Orchid Pharma. And we retained the IP rights, right? So we are supposed to get the returns on this from the royalties. Few months ago, Allegra Therapeutics underwent bankruptcy. So Orchid was also one of the bidder, and Orchid bought Allegra Therapeutics now. So the molecule had such a lovely journey, I must say. It had from invention, it was dead on the shelf. We gave the in vivo life, and then again, due to the financial reasons, again it went down, and now again back, it's rising up, and now I think it's going to ride well along, because the original innovators own the complete asset of the entire journey.
Yeah, what a journey, 2 bankruptcies. I mean, and so I think that tells us all on how challenging it is, not only scientifically, but also economically. Yes. And you registered first in the US and not in India. So why did you go to the US? Was it because of the partnership with Allegra?
Yes, and US, for obvious reasons of the financial market, the largest market. That's the only reason why US was chosen to be the partners. That was decision by Allegra Therapeutics, basically. Mm-hmm.
And do you know how much you invested overall in this? Because how long did it take? 15 years or something?
18 years. I always tell it is like 2 gestational periods in years, not in months. And usually the chemists, I call them the father, and the biologist as the mother, because they have to nurture it and bring it up to life completely as a human being, the person of this molecule. So it's 18 years journey. The monies are very different. If you look at the global scenario, the trials, everything, they are in a different numbers. But in Indian trial, which right now I am overseeing the phase 4 clinical trials of the molecule. So it is not that expensive to do phase 4 clinical trials in India. In India, overall, if one has to do a clinical trial for one indication, it would cost, one single indication, from phase 1 to phase 4, it would cost somewhere around 10 million maximum in India for one single indication. But if you go global, that's going to shoot up, I think, 10x to 20x. Yes.
Yeah, very interesting to learn about. And you need to go global, because if you want to register globally, you can't do the trial only in India.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We're going to come back to you and this example. But now I want to turn to Professor Pinyu Ratanapawan, who is a professor at the Faculty of Medicine of the Siri Raj Hospital in Bangkok. And she's the director of the Siri Raj Clinical Trials Unit, and also a member of the Institute of Clinical Research, Cyprus in Thailand, which is one of our partners. And I asked her to share actually all the clinical trials that she has done in her institute. And I didn't want to spell out all the names because it's very difficult. This is because of WHO. But it's really impressive. I mean, these are all the trials, and I can see that, you know, one of the most recent reserve antibiotics that were developed, you did the trials, you published about them, you did also our trial on zoliflodacin, which is a GARDP product for drug-resistant gonorrhea. So I was wondering, I mean, I wasn't aware that Prince Mahidol University is such a hotspot for antibiotic innovation and clinical trials. So I wanted to know from you, how did you turn Mahidol in such a globally recognized university and center to come to you to run clinical trials?
Let me explain more about Mahidol and Sirirat infrastructure about the research. 20 years ago, we created the CTU, Critical Trial Unit, which is a very small group of researchers. And we conducted only investigator-driven trial and some studies supported by NGO, non-profit organizations such as Wellcome Trust, NIH, or Advanced ID by Singapore Group. However, nearly 5 and 7 years ago, we believe that we can go more. And Professor Kunkanya Chokpaibunkit, who is the first CICRES director, believed that we can do that. So we set up a Nature Institute by using our own financial system. We do not wait for the support from Mahidol University. So we can procure and we can hire skilled personnel and also buy advanced equipment, and we can build our own institute. We have our own inpatient ward for research subjects, and we have our own OPD, outpatient clinic for research subjects. So we can enroll 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. That's why we can help all pharmaceutical company and also sponsor to complete management in the research. That's why we are attract many pharmaceutical company. That's why we can complete many study. And on the top list is our investigator-driven trial. We create our own protocol and we ask support from many pharmaceutical companies such as Meiji, MSD, and also it's very small, I forget my glasses, Daiichi, okay. And we can complete many international multi-center trials. And you can see that zoliflodacin was supported by GARDP and is very successful. We can enroll many cases in our country. And for the Overcome trial, this study enrolled approximately 400 cases all over the world from more than 20 sites. But only at the Sirirat Hospital, we enroll approximately 120 cases, more than 1/3 of the overall study. So that's why if we decide to participate and decide to help you in enrolling the patient, we will do our best to help you to complete the study. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. So you mentioned that out of the global trial, which enrolled 400 patients overall, you enrolled 120 in your clinical trial.
And,
unit.
Yes, and some study we enroll more than 75% of study subject.
Yeah, I understand why the companies come to you to actually recruit you as a site. And you also said, I think it's really interesting, you actually have a ward, that means you have a hospital which is linked to your unit. And I think this is also, for example, as I said, we invited Brazil, Fiocruz is the same principle. You actually do research and you have a hospital because you can't do research if you have no patients. Yeah.
That's correct. But for some critically ill patients, we let the patient stay in the normal ward. But in some healthy volunteer or mild disease, we can let them stay in the research unit, which it's easier for us to do like PK/PD study. We can collect blood like every 1 hour in that ward, and it's easier for us to perform the study.
Very good. So I can fully understand why you have this competitive advantage. And you mentioned it before. I think the trials, the single center investigator-driven trials are your trials. This is what you have been developing, or what is your research agenda in Mahidol?
Right now, we try to collaborate with Faculty of Pharmacy, Mahidol University, to create our own product, but none of these drugs enter the phase 2 trial. So we try to, right now we conducted several clinical trials by using the old antibiotic, like combination therapy, the old medication with the different method, like nebulizing antibiotic or continuous drip of antibiotic. So we are going to conduct several trials in the next 5 years by using the old antibiotic, but in the new way of therapy. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Pino. Very fascinating story. We are also going to come back to you. But now I want to turn to Professor Glenda Gray, who is the chair of the GARDP board. So I'm very pleased to have her here with us. You're a pediatrician by training. I know that you are actually really, this is what you are by heart. And for many years, you have been the CEO of the South African Medical Research Council. And you have been, the South African Medical Research Council has supported GARDP from the very beginning, when we were founded, even financially. So I wanted to hear from you, what was your specific focus at the South African Medical Research Council when you were there, and what you did with us? Here we can see on the slide, here I can read it better. It's the specific focus on neonatal sepsis in particular.
Yeah, so can you hear me?
Yes.
So the South African Medical Research Council is the South African equivalent of the NIH. Even though our funding is very small, we're the largest funder, the largest African funder of medical research. But because our budget is small in comparison to the NIH, we like to leverage our money, and we also like to go into partnerships with people. So the approach that we fund, so at the MRC, we fund the top 10 causes of mortality in our country. So we have a very decolonized view, and we set our own research agenda, and we do our own funding. So in terms of South Africa's 10 most causes of mortality, this is driven by 4 colliding epidemics: an epidemic of HIV, TB, an epidemic of non-communicable diseases, an epidemic of violence and injury. But the fourth epidemic is one of maternal and child health mortality. And so that is why we were also interested in mortality in the neonatal period and in children. So I am a pediatrician. I started off my career at the Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital, and I worked in neonatology. And in fact, my first publication was on what we call drip flagging, where we learned that we could reduce mortality in the neonates by just knowing what date we put the drip up so that we could change it, and that's a good way how we could drive it. But HIV happened in my country, and so I got diverted. And then when I came back to the MRC, I found that neonatal septicemia was still a big problem. So I had left neonatology and came back. And so in Africa, 1 in 5 children under 5 are affected by the lack of adequate antibiotic resistance, because of antibiotic resistance. So that's a big problem. So it's something that vaccines can't reverse. It's something that we have to address. At a global level, 3 million children or infants are affected by antimicrobial resistance in the first year of life, and it counts for 140,000 deaths of infants because of AMR resistance. So it would be an indictment if the MRC and South Africa did not commit itself to funding and understanding neonatal septicemia. And so we've done it in a 3-pronged fashion, as you can see. We're interested in building capacity, so developing clinical trial capability at our ICUs in our big hospitals, understanding the prevalence and the burden of nosocomial infection in neonates, and basically collaborating with GARDP to do clinical trials that establishes different combinations, as well as looking at the right pharmacokinetics. So that's very important to us. We also are committed to, because we don't have a lot of money, we're committed to leveraging our position in South Africa in global R&D partnerships. And we do want to do this because we can only make impact as an African country if we work with like-minded individuals that are committed to public good innovations and also committed to finding solutions for something that we should prevent. 140,000 deaths in neonates is a significant amount. And so we are committed not only to helping children that are born in South Africa, but also that hopefully our funding will support the work in other parts of Africa, like Kenya and other areas in the world. So that's the journey of the MRC.
Thank you so much, Glenda. And I think you were successful in leveraging money, because together we started this neonatal sepsis trial in South Africa, actually in Cape Town and in Johannesburg. And we found other funders, including the Gates Foundation, but also in the German Ministry of Research and Education, which has a different name today. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the neonatal sepsis trial?
Yes, so I think there are two aspects of it. Obviously, the one is trying to find, to make sure we confirm the right doses, and the other is to look at various combinations of drugs to prevent carbapenem resistance. And so we do find that if there is public money, if governments put money in to programs, they also, it's easier to bring in other collaborators, both public and private partnerships. And so the ability for us to do these studies supports the registration of products. And you can see from the middle is that the work that we did allowed us to register a drug, and a lot of the data came from South Africa. So that's our commitment to being involved in global R&D, so that our data can be used for registration of this product at a global level. So that's very important, and it also builds the capacity. If we can use our data to register drugs, more and more people will come to us, because they will see us as a clinical trial infrastructure that can present rigorous data that can allow for registration even at the FDA.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's true what you said. We also did the zoliflodacin trial in South Africa. We recruited HIV positive patients. We tried to recruit as many women as possible, because we know that they are more vulnerable to get actually sexual transmitted infections. So thank you so much. And I have another follow-up question for later. But I want to turn to Nathalie, who joins us from Médecins Sans Frontières. And Médecins Sans Frontières, and I wasn't aware, they have developed a diagnostic tool, which is an app which you can download on your phone. You can see it here on the screen. It's a free smartphone-based application that supports laboratory technicians to read and interpret antibiotic susceptibility testing. Basically, it overcomes the lack of trained microbiologists. Your colleague Nada said that if we want to train as many microbiologists as we would need, it would take us 400 years. So it's probably not the solution. It's not the way to go. And that is why I think it's really interesting what you did. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more on how you did it and how it's been rolled out.
Sure. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So thanks a lot. I think it's great to hear about diagnostics. About therapeutics and molecules. And we feel in MSF that it is equally important to talk about diagnostic availability. So that's one thing. And maybe for those of you who don't know MSF, Doctor Without Borders, we deliver medical care in 70 countries. We are quite well known for the medical care we deliver, but we also contribute to innovations actually as well. So just on a side note. So how did, this whole story started in the Middle East, where MSF was receiving patients and they were not responding to the antibiotics we had. So that was the first thing. And just to give you an idea, at the time it was about 50% of our patients with one multi-resistant bacteria. This was the first time MSF decided to open the eyes and say, okay, we do need to invest, in this area. We need to look at what is happening there. So that's probably the first, information you need to have to understand why we have developed such a product. The second one is that in the places where we work, quite remote places in general, you have a lack of health facilities. You also have limited trained personnel. I mean, no data often, so we call them blind spots. And we are, in parallel, always very interested in, understanding which diagnostic tools can be helpful for us in these places. And you know also that, in some of these facilities are not well equipped. Sometimes even the supply chains are real challenges. So we monitor as MSF, the kind of product we can see on the market, the one that are there, the one that could be adapted, but also the one that are in development. And we couldn't find anything. So what has happened is that back in 2016, so in Yemen, where, the war-wounded patients were, coming with all these multi-resistant bacteria, MSF decided to set up microbiology lab. So that's the first thing. So we organized it, we trained people with the tools that were existing, and it was quite okay, but the problem was that the interpretation of the results were not good enough. So that was the second moment where MSF understood that, indeed, as you were saying, because we lack microbiologists, in the countries, in most of the countries, we need to do something out of, this information. We cannot wait for 100 years, actually, in sub-Saharan Africa to be able to have the right ratio, population micropathologists that we need to have. So this, because of that, MSF organized telemedicine, actually, in the first place. So all the results were sent, basically in Paris. Someone was reading them and sharing back the results. But you can imagine that this is not sustainable. So it was decided that, okay, now we need to find something that is going to work in a timely manner, also to allow the clinicians to make the right decision. And this is, so with all this information, you basically have, the different ingredients of why MSF has decided to invest in the development of this application.
Yeah, and basically it means that in the facility you need the dish and the discs, and then you use the sample, you wait until it...
So it's pretty simple. So basically, so it's a smartphone-based application, as you said. You take the picture of the Petri dish, then you have an AI-assisted system that will recognize the Petri dish and the antibiotics. So these are the two first things. And then you have an expert system where you can find, using all the international standards that we have to update every year, by the way. So it's a number of rules that are inside this machine that will be able to read and interpret the antibiograms. So this helps basically the clinician to make a decision. But the other important thing for us, developing this tool, because we knew that there was a need of training, that this tool is also a training tool. So it's not that the technician or the clinicians are passive, actually. They have access to, the rule and understanding the rule that is used to come to that conclusion. So it's also a way for them basically to learn. So that's the idea. And maybe a last point, because we are talking about developing, innovation from elsewhere, basically not only from high-income countries. And this tool actually has been developed with the technicians, with the clinicians, with MSF people, with the government. So it's a collaboration, of course, with researchers elsewhere as well. But it is very important that the design, of this tool has been organized thanks to the collaboration and with the people who are using, this tool.
Yeah, it's a real user-driven innovation.
Exactly.
And I understand you are legally the owner, and you're also the market authorization holder, because this is considered actually a medical device, although it's an app, so it's not I thought always devices, I could touch them, but this one I can't. So how does it, so MSF International is the one who is, where did you register it?
So this is really about the regulatory pathway. So we've developed this app first, but applications that are used to make medical decisions are called medical devices.
Yeah.
So it's called actually a software as medical device. And in order to have this product on the market, we have not only to design it according to the rules of the high-income country standards, but that's what we did. And so we went through the regulatory pathway, and this is a CE mark product, which means that we have a market authorization to use it everywhere. And it is rolled out today. So it took maybe 6 years, just for information, it took 6 years to develop it. We tested it in 5 countries, and now it's rolled out in 10, and it's free. And that's quite important as well. And you can use it offline. And that's not a minor information. In the places where we work, you have to you upload the app first, but then you can use it, you know, anytime, even if you don't have electricity, you don't have, you know, connections, etc. So that's very important. And for us in MSF, because of the places where we work, we want to develop tools that are, you know, really working in the settings where we work.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Nathalie. Nathalie is the head of advocacy and communication in MSF, and she stepped in for her colleague, who is the inventor, who is pregnant. 7 months.
After,
so she had a
delivering Antibiotic. Now soon she will have a
yes,
another baby. Yes.
yeah. Very well. So, James, let's go to IFBMA. You're the executive director for innovation, R&D, and also the chair of the AMI Industry Alliance. I also have to say thank you again, because when James was with GSK, he also helped us a lot in setting up GARDP. I remember he was part of the initial working group meetings where we discussed, does it make sense, what should we do, what shouldn't we do, and so he knows us very well. And yeah, now you are pushing for pull incentives, and I unfortunately couldn't get into the room of the previous session, so maybe you need to update me. But I wanted to know from you, where are we? I think many of us read the recent publication of Kevin and his colleagues, where they said that UK and Italy are meeting the targets for pull incentives, but other countries who did something, like Germany, France, they are below what the minimum, I think even the minimum target would be. And we are still waiting for some countries to actually do something. So can you give us an update?
Thanks very much. Can you hear me okay? It's funny, you don't hear it yourself. So that's why everyone's asked, do you hear us? Thanks, Peter, and really a pleasure to be here with this fantastic, diverse panel. I kind of like the format as well, although I apologize to some people. So multi-part question that you ask. The way I would start is, well, what do we need to do to make this sustainable, right? Who do we need to convince? And really, it is the investors. As Manish explained, brilliantly, the process of discovering and developing a drug is really complicated. It has many stages. Many times, you didn't touch on this actually, but many times it fails, right, along the way. So certainly before I joined the IFBMA, as you said, I was in GSK for 16 years, and during that period of time, I was involved with at least 6 programs that failed, right, at different stages. Very excited that GSK has now just approved a new antibiotic, and we can maybe come back to that one. But that's another part of the journey that you described. And so the question is, what's the circumstances that will encourage investors to fund all of that work along the way, including the failures? And so then the next question is, okay, who are the investors? Well, for in many cases, it needs to start in publicly funded labs. Fine, that's like any drug development program. But then it will usually be rolled out often to a small company to begin with. And those small companies are funded by venture capitalists, primarily. And then that will progress it to a certain extent. Actually, sometimes in antibiotics, many of those small companies also can receive funding from organizations like CarbX, which enables them to take the product through to a certain stage. And Manish, this was probably your first gestation period, I would argue. What then happens is that you need to do the bigger stage trials, as you said, and that's where the costs multiply very significantly. And that multiplication happens no matter where you're doing those studies. It can be a bit more or a bit less in some countries, but at the end of the day, again, you said this very well, in order to get the product approved everywhere, including in the higher income countries, the data has to be, the trials have to be run in a way that's acceptable, and the data that comes out is acceptable by those regulatory agencies, which still, at this point, means, by and large, it needs to be done in those countries still, right? That's how it is. That means the costs are high, and therefore those are the investors that also need to be targeted. So they are usually medium and large-sized companies that can, create the funding within their own ongoing R&D portfolio strategy, and or external investors as well, to the extent that they, are willing to do that. All that to say, there aren't many investors that are active in this space. Again, I liked your example of paraphrasing, but your CEO at one point basically said, "We need to do this, so we're going to do it." That's almost a philanthropic approach, and some other philanthropic groups do provide funding as well. Anyway, long and the short of it, that's what we're trying to do. So the calculations that you referred to, Peter, which Kevin did and others have done in similar ways, and all get to a similar result, are that you need to be able to have a predictable revenue stream when you do launch it globally in the hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Which on the one hand does sound a lot, but equally when you look at it compared to most other drugs, it's low on the list. It's not a blockbuster, it's nowhere near. In fact, Kevin's calculation said it would be number 200 on the list of medicines around the world. So, again, trying to bring a few pieces together there. Those calculations would be, we believe, and I think many people that have looked at this share a belief, that's sufficient to attract investors, whether they are inside medium and larger companies or in other commercial type of investment bodies. They aren't necessarily chasing blockbusters, right? I think this is a different lens, but that's fine. There are plenty of companies that would consider this a nice business model that works, that's sustainable, and that enables them to reinvest back into the early stages again. So that's, again, just trying to paint a picture. I haven't gone into the details. Happy to do that if that's helpful. I know others were here in the previous session as well. Actually, sorry, you asked another part, which was, where are we when we look around the world? So, right, so how to think about that? As you said, the first country that actually launched something to do this was the UK. Initially, back in about 2017, they did a pilot program that they called a subscription payment model, and it involved a combination of NICE, the valuation HTA body in the UK, together with the NHS, because they recognized they needed to do something quite different. It wasn't just the same as finding a different price for a pack of antibiotics. And so what they did was create a model of subscription payment where there's an annual payment per year, because you can't really forecast how much of the antibiotic is going to be needed. It depends on how the resistance spreads or not, and many other factors. So they did that, and it's evolved since. It's successfully worked with 2 companies on 2 of the more innovative antibiotics launched, and now that's rolled out, and that has met the threshold according to most of the experts that have looked at these calculations. There's been regular announcements at the G7 meetings to say we all need to do this, all the G7 countries. And actually, from the industry side, we agree that would create the critical mass globally, that would create the circle that we talked about. But the only other country that has really launched a full program is Italy, where they will top up using an innovative fund the revenues if it's falling below the kind of threshold, which is a different way to do it, but also helpful. Finally, to say that a number of other countries have done smaller things, including Japan, including Germany, France, incremental changes to the existing system. And we don't see a way that will achieve the critical mass. But what is helpful as well is what's going on in Brussels, where there's a significant debate about two models, in fact, but one is a new voucher that hasn't been tried before that would create substantial lump sum value through a transferable exclusivity approach. So the final thing that we heard earlier today is that Germany, the German government, were represented on that panel, and they said that they were very supportive of that approach. We see that as a very positive step, and we do hope that it will be concluded in those discussions in Brussels in the coming months or so.
Yeah. Thank you so much, James, for sharing this news. I think that's very encouraging. I looked at I tried to, they diverted pretty much on this European transferable exclusivity voucher from the initial proposal to what I understand is discussed now. I mean, also for GARDP, this is important. It's an important pull incentive. GARDP would also, with our partners, benefit from it. And I think what is important is to make it practicable, because I also see some features which would basically make it void. There was a discussion about you need to file the registration with EMA within 90 days after FDA. That's not what in practice is possible. We're just preparing the EMA dossier for zoliflodacin after having submitted to FDA with our partner. The dossier is fundamentally different from what you submit in the US, what you have to submit in Europe. And this is actually a major investment in terms of expertise, time, and money. And I wanted to recap, Kevin, you need to correct me if I'm wrong. I think in the article, it's the pull incentive, the mid-range is 363 million. I was very positively, surprised that Keftavi is nearly reaching this in terms of sales after a number of years, and even Cefiderocol is with 260 million or so. I mean, it's not a blockbuster, as you said, but at least, I mean, it allows to keep it alive on the market, and hopefully expanding in other markets where the patient numbers are higher. I do hope that actually it's going to give another pull. And that is something that at GARDP we also want to explore with partners in India. Is like, the biggest disease burden is in Southeast Asia. Isn't this also a pull incentive? Because it is, if we manage to actually reach the patients who really need those products, is this something that also can help us? So yeah, I think it's encouraging, and I mean, as you said, there are also a number of your IFPMA companies who are still very active. Your former company, GSK, where I have to disclose, we are also getting funding from GSK. So, but Roche is starting a phase 3 trial soon on their compound. They have other compounds. I understand Pfizer is still active. And as you said, it is really also often the CEOs or the owners, and we see this with Roche, Debiopharm, a Swiss family-owned company where the CEO actually wants them to do antibiotic drug development. And the management, if they would look at the numbers, they would have closed this program for a long time, I think. So we need to also individuals to make this difference. How do you see your member companies? How does it evolve? I mean, there are these obesity GLP-1 products which you make an enormous amount of benefit. I mean, even if we would reach this 360 million pull incentive, how much would we pull in your membership?
Well, I think the question is, I mean, there's several questions, right? So what do we need? I would start with. I think we need, in a sustainable way, to have a number of companies that are remaining active in here. One of the pieces of research that the AMR Alliance did a couple of years ago was looking at the total number of people working in research and development for antibiotics, and it's declined by about 50% over the last decade or so, as best we can tell. And that's primarily a result of these economic challenges. So we need to stabilize that as a minimum. If you look at other disease areas, I think HIV is a good one where there's still tremendous innovation coming through there in a continued way, and amazing programs to get those medicines to patients all around the world. And we should look at what we can learn from that for, I mean, antibiotics is broader, but it can be comparable in my opinion. So we don't need all the top 20 companies to suddenly restart, right? But what we do need, I believe, is to maintain some of the bigger and certainly the medium-sized ones in there. And you know, what our view is that incentives of this kind of order of magnitude would really make a big step to do that. Because one other thing that I would say in terms of you know, what's making a difference, you can see on the slide here the AMR Action Fund that was launched with primarily funding from the industry, from 20-odd companies, and has now invested in 10 small companies here. That is to help bridge the gap until we reach the stabilization of the global economics on it. Because at the moment we're really not there. And so you can see the graph on the top and also the publication on the right there, which are two reports that we've put out, which firstly shows that the overall pipeline is declining gradually, but surely. And the recent WHO data, actually from last week or the week before, confirms 10% year-on-year decline. You know, that's real and it's not new, but it's not going to change unless something changes, and we're saying these incentives are what will change it. And then secondly, in our report, on the right-hand side, we share very similar kind of thinking and principles to the Kevin's analysis. Not exactly the same, but really along the similar lines. And so I believe that there is a consensus on what needs to be done, and we need to find a way to build on the progress and the excitement of the high-level meeting last year to keep that moving forward.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. We don't need every company to engage. We need to keep those who are engaged. And then we also have, I mean, New York, it is not such a new player. It's just somebody which you did it under the radar, actually, at least from what we saw in Europe. I want to turn to the audience and see whether anybody has any questions or comments to the panel. I'm going to borrow your mic. We have another one. Very good.
Thank you.
It works.
It
You
works?
have to
You
hold
really
it
can't
close.
hear it actually when you're anyway. Hi, my name is Meeta Dilipala and I'm from MD Health, and we are a healthcare comms agency based in London. What I wanted to ask was, obviously we've talked a lot about innovation and also innovative antibiotics, but obviously in lower middle income countries, a huge problem is still health literacy around stewardship. I don't know if anybody would like to comment around the importance of keeping going with public awareness around stewardship and the importance of it.
Excellent question. Let me gather two other questions and then I'll give it back to the panel. Louise? Of course. Yeah.
Thanks very much for a really insightful conversation panel. Louise Nott-Smith, Carbex. I just wonder if you would be able to collectively comment about the idea of the bundling of incentives, because we also see that big question about diagnostics not being economically interesting for healthcare systems, and so bringing those together in a more systematic way with therapeutics.
Thank you, Louise. And Yvonne.
Yes, we've seen some paper, for instance, in Bangladesh on the quantity of production of antibiotics. I wonder whether we could make the case for maturation of the industry in the global south from quantity to quality, to also addressing AMR and providing some systematic incentive for companies?
Excellent question. So who wants to go first? Health literacy and stewardship,
Okay, I can take
maturation of...
I'll take the.
Glenda, you're first.
So you're correct. There's a balance between access and stewardship, which countries in my situation need to balance. And there was a very beautiful session earlier on about the use of digital health and AI in largely stewardship and the detection of hospital-acquired infections, and the beauty of things like wastewater surveillance in the hospital to help direct stewardship. So stewardship needs to be data-driven, and the best way to improve the literacy in stewardship is to work with data, and that people can have a direct understanding between what's happening in your hospital and your ability to respond. And I think that's and maybe you can mention, I think that's the best way to manage stewardship and stewardship literacy, which should always be around understanding the data and what's emerging from your hospitals.
Thank you. Nathalie?
Yes, maybe very quickly, just to say that, for example, Antibiotic actually is also producing trends. So, in the hospital, so then you have access to the data, and actually the hospital has access to the data, not us. Just to flag it, I think it is important, and it is quite helpful. And also the rules, as I was saying, the tool itself is, allowing for, proper stewardship, but also training tools. So you understand, what is happening, what are the rules that are, applying in this specific case, and from one hospital to the other, you will have also data that will be generated that will give you the trend in this region, in this place, and you can improve your clinical recommendations. So I think that at least from Antibiotic perspective, that's a contribution to it. Yeah.
May I add more? Yeah. I think it's difficult to balance between access to antibiotic and AMS, especially in low-income country, because we cannot control our antibiotic in our country. In Thailand, we can buy over-the-counter antibiotic. Yeah, several years ago, may I mention the name of antibiotic? Tebipenem tried to market in our country, but we believe that if oral carbapenem enter our country, it will be result in spreading of carbapenem-resistant gram-negative bacteria in our country. That's why we did not allow tebipenem to market in our country. So because our MS system is not good enough, we cannot get some good antibiotic to market in our country.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting example that the oral carbapenems are actually bearing a major risk of being abused because they are so easily, they may be so easily available. James, you want to talk about the bundling of incentives or somebody else?
What do you mean, Louise, actually? But do you mean a single incentive that needs to include a diagnostics as well as a therapeutic? So, I think in principle, that would be great, right? No one's going to disagree with that, and in some ways it would help with the problem that you described, which is very real and concerning. But thank heavens, Manish has got a carbapenem sparing product. So that's, I think, the question then is how do you do it, and how do you do it in the context of the challenge that I just described, right? Of creating a sustainable economic model anyway, because it definitely makes it more complicated. It would need other players, other companies to be part of that from an early stage, and so on. So I have to say, I don't see that happening massively at the moment. I do see some gradual increase of the discussion of how do we, as you said, really, how do we get diagnostics to be used more for a start, right? And having free ones that are easy to access helps a lot, but still doesn't guarantee it. We've all lived through the worst pandemic ever, and we all did use diagnostics very differently during that. And so, but I don't really see that what the changes that happened there that have, they haven't been sustained, right? So for me, the diagnostics question is a lot bigger, particularly in the retail setting and particularly in those countries where you can get antibiotics over the counter. I just tell one more bit of that story, which was that I was on holiday in Costa Rica this summer, and my son had a mosquito bite that got infected and was quite nice. So we went to see the doctor, and we had a really interesting discussion about how the protocol that he has to go through to prescribe any antibiotics there. And it was pretty intensive in terms of the diagnostics procedure. He didn't have to wait for a test result, and that was part of the point I'm making. But he had to log it and then follow up as well. And I thought that was, best practice. Okay, it's middle-income country for sure, and actually a good system, and it was a private system. So I'm not saying it's replicable, but I do think there are examples that we should make sure are well known and well understood of how to try and get that balance right. I have a question for Manish, which is what, if that's okay, Peter?
Yeah, sure.
Which is, and maybe this is a little bit coming to Ivan's question, I don't know, but how are you thinking to get your product to people all around the world, in India and elsewhere?
Okay. First, I would address one part of the question you had asked me previously, and to her question, it is the economics of the socioeconomic status is very important when we are prescribing antibiotics. Now, for example, in a country like India, if I have to go to a clinician, the time required and the cost of consulting and the diagnostic test is at least 10 to 15 times more than the cost of the antibiotic, which the pharmacist he knows by the number of patients who are coming to him, oh, this is the antibiotic this clinician is always prescribing. So he says, oh, in this region, this is the infection, you take this antibiotic. He becomes the prescriber, which is wrong. But for this patient, he would say, I don't have 15x money to go, and I don't want to lose my work days. So they would just go and buy it from the pharmacist. That is a socioeconomic challenge. I think it's a larger problem one has to think about to solve than, even though we educate them, how do you solve this financial burden on the people? So that is one part. Now, coming back to your question about how do we, right now, it's just a 1.5 month ago, we have acquired Allegra Therapeutics. Orchid has acquired Allegra Therapeutics. So that strategy is still on. But the very fact that what I would see is someone has to grab this molecule. Literally, the reason is, look at the way it binds the enzyme. The molecule binds at almost like 500 times less concentration. So that's the reason the dose is just 1/4 of the dose of tazobactam. It's 0.5 gram can do a bigger job. And cefepime, it's known to the bacteria. And I always say in antibacterials, there is the mind of bacteria, I call them, because when they come together, they strategize. And we should not attack them directly always. Show them the old, it is like antibiotic recycling. Essentially, when you bring back cefepime is stable to AMC by itself and doesn't induce. And it also has got OXA48 inherent stability. So that's a good combination. And both are Zwitter ions. So that's amazing to penetration. And both have got almost equal lung penetration levels. So good for HAPVAP. So it has got all those properties, tick boxes. And top it up, if you look at both the studies published, the meropenem activity and N-metazobactam cefepime activities equal, 98% cure. So which means, why do we have to use any carbapenems as the first line? Replace it with this, and we'll spare these drugs for the reserved category. And that is a learning I think we need to take it up. And Orchid has just taken over this molecule, and I think they would come up with a strategy to how to bring it around the world. There are talks with various companies who could in-license it probably, and that's the best way to bring it to the world. And of course, we look for any partners who are willing to talk to us. Please do shoot an email, to us. We would definitely want to consider that because this is a drug. One way, if you ask me, I think you could sense that in my passion of responding. Because as an inventor, you get into that vein already directly. But then, practically looking at it, this will genuinely spare the carbapenems, which is the need of the hour. And not because I'm the leading co-inventor of this molecule, I'm pushing for it, but it can definitely address that one challenge at this point in time till we have newer molecules to take over that journey.
I think it's really interesting to hear from you that you're really facing, all the companies are facing the same challenges, and making these new antibiotics broadly available is really, really, I mean, it's a huge endeavor. It's not easy, and you need partners for that. And that is, I think, where we are also encouraged is like that the whole environment is very collaborative between the originator companies, whether they are in Europe or in the US or in India, and also other players. So what do you think, Manish? I mean, now the Orchid story, we know that Wockhardt is very much focused on new antibiotics. Bugworks is one of our partners, whether they are very early. You told me we should only talk about it when we, what did you say? When we
always come to phase 2, first cohort.
Yes, it's like pregnancy. Before end of third month, you don't tell your parents.
Absolutely.
And so what do you think? Can we expect more innovation coming from India or from other countries?
Yeah, I mean, to start off from where you began, the first company from India to have delivered an indigenous molecule is Orchid Pharma now. They are the leaders. And we have Wockhardt, which has got it is not a BLI. Zenich is not a BLI. It is a Zidibactam. It's got inherent antibacterial activity as well as stability to these enzymes. So that's an amazing molecule. So that's following up now. Then third is Bugworks. Bugworks is in phase 1, and I'm sure I desire that they should come to phase 3 and complete and become a drug in the market, because that's a very broad spectrum antibiotic. And the point I was making to him was, to Peter was, unless you finish the first cohort of phase 2 trials, don't speak about it. The reason is, in phase 1, it could be amazing. No celebration, please. It's an antimicrobial. Because you don't have the enemy yet in the scene. When the enemy comes in, the bacteria can do two things. It can modify the host significantly. The host immune system can be altered. It can modify the drug as well. So the third dimension, I call the third eye, opens up, and that's when you have to be very cautious. Once phase 2, one cohort is completed, then you celebrate phase 1 in the public. And that's the best way to go forward for it. And of course, Bugworks is there, it's going on. And there's one more organization called as Foundation for Neglected Disease Research, FNDR. And they are also working very well in this domain. Sridhar Narayanan is the CEO there, and they're doing amazing work in bringing new molecules as well. So there's one more follow-on. You mentioned 3, I added the 4th one. So
excellent.
More to expect. And I think always, my wife says, the lackness, when you feel you have lackness, you go an extra step to achieve something which you are missing, right? So similar is the policy here, because we feel most of the third world countries or LMICs have been always seen as consumers than innovators all these years. So I think that could have been, quote unquote, a psychology by which companies started working more and more towards it, and now we are getting into the game. You can see already the 4th company in the race who is making new molecules. So I think more to come from around the world.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. I think it's really encouraging. And as you said, there's a different cost structure. I mean, the Indian companies do have a different cost structure, even if you do the trials outside of India. It's not the same. And I hope that you're also going to attract local investors or investors from the region. Professor Pinho, what can we expect from Thailand? Is there something that Prince Maidol University, now that you are performing so many trials, I mean, do you have companies to partner with? Do you want to set the agenda? What do you think should be done? More new molecules or repurposing of old antibiotics? I saw you did the trial on fosfomycin, for example.
I think based on our capacity, we cannot create our own new medication. So we try to use the new regimen with the old drug. However, from my personal point of view, I think right now there are many companies try to invent some new drug, but all of this cannot be used in our country because we have different in epidemiology. For example, right now there are new, like at least 5 antibiotics launched in United States, but all of that can kill the different mechanism in Thailand. So we think we can have like Asian working group try to invent some new antibiotic that can focus on AMR that spread in our area. Because in Thailand for carbapenem resistant enterobacteriosis, we have no KPC or OXA48 that as in United States. And for Acinetobacter baumannii, we do not have OXA23. We have NDM combined with artemetallobeta-lactamase. So new invention may not be helpful for Asian countries. So I think we need some collaboration and some help from your partnership.
Yeah, I think that's a super important point you're making, that what may work for in the US, for patients in the US, is not necessarily transferable to patients in Thailand. And that is why it's also so important that the innovation is driven actually by those where the biggest disease burden is. And the AMR disease burden is not in the US, it's outside of the US. And that is also when you see, I mean, unfortunately, it's in parallel to our session, the global disease burden. I mean, if you see the data, we are now reaching a tipping point. We expect that it's really going to go up in the coming years. It's going to touch, in particular, the elderly, I mean, increasingly older population, but also we believe, as you said, Glenda, I mean, neonates is still, I mean, a huge mortality, and there's more to be done. I mean, so even if you look at that data, we do not believe that we should only focus on the older population, but neonates for us is one of our priority areas. And as you said, we also as GARDP, we believe in this strategy to look at old antibiotics in combination, because it may take you 5 years to develop a new combination versus 15 years to come up with a new molecule. And also the investment is not comparable. So I think it's a really, we need to make better use of the existing resource of the overall, antibiotics, and for that we need to do more trials as you are doing in Mahidol. Glenda, what about you? You want to share something more about South Africa? You are now a hotspot for drug discovery, with Kelly Shibale. I met him last week in Geneva. And so I'm very impressed. Are we going to see more molecules coming out of South Africa?
Well, I think it's, if we look at the African continent, so 25% of the global burden of disease, we only produce 3% of drug products globally, and we have to import over 95% of active pharmaceutical ingredients. So we clearly have a problem in Africa. So, and this was highlighted during COVID when we had lack of access to diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. And so at a continental level, we need to invest in drug manufacturing and vaccine manufacturing. So there is an African, it's called the African Drug Manufacturing Initiative, which is very important to try and spearhead capacity in manufacturing. And there are a couple of components. One is obviously to harmonize regulatory oversight, so the establishment of the African Medicines Agency to help with the dossiers that come, so that everyone reads the same dossier. You don't have to change it each time. But at the same time, to invest in platforms for drug development, and also to create incentives, financial incentives to drive drug development on the continent. So clearly we far behind India, and we need to learn, to how to address our lack of capacity. And there are certain areas on the continent, and you mentioned the drug development capacity with Kelly Shibale, who's involved in screening of compounds and then testing them to see how we can move those forward into drug development. And therein lies the challenge, because finding a drug, screening it in vivo is a different situation when you have to get the funding. So these initiatives, these continental initiatives in Africa, are critical to our development, we need to get into the fourth industrial revolution, and we need to contribute, to make sure that on our continent, we are also investing in manufacturing and making an ability. So I think, as you mentioned in Thailand, just that we have to change our mindset, and we can't just be importers of drugs, but we also have to invest in the whole manufacturing arena and ecosystem.
Thank you so much, Glenda. I think you partly also answered Yvonne's question. And I remember when I joined WHO, like 18 years ago, there was all about Indian industry. They can only do generics. And now we see innovation coming out of India, drug discovery in South Africa. So I think there is a maturation, and it is going to be more global. And that I find really encouraging. MSF, Natalie, MSF created DNDi, now you did Antibiotic. What is your next thing, MSF? Are you now going to bring us more medical devices that will change the diagnostic arena, or who knows? Yeah.
No, the reality is that we have developed Antibiotic because there was nothing.
Yeah.
So we are the DNA of MSF is to do, field operation, medical care, and provide it. But when we don't have the tools, actually, this is why TNDI was created also, but this is also why Antibiotic became, an important project for MSF. So, we were not planning to be a legal manufacturer of a medical device, that's for sure. We had to. But this is coming at a cost, right? And I think it is important because, the regulatory pathways are super expensive for small entities and even for NGOs, even though MSF is, has some quite good funding basis, I would say. But the requirements are not easy to follow. And second, and that's something that Nada was saying, that, we need to adapt also some of the frameworks, because some of the requirements are for high-income countries. They are not, even working. If you had to test them in real life, it would not work. And we know the number of diagnostics that have been developed in high-income countries that are taking the dust in some of the health facilities. So what we need is really not only to have the right regulatory frameworks, but also to have the framework adapted. And here, again, I'm not saying like lower the quality, not at all. We need to keep the quality high. This has to be very robust. But the question is, what do you balance? What are some of the key requirements that you need to have to develop a framework that makes sense? So, and I think the same goes for the development of drugs, right? As you were saying, if I'm not wrong, 90% of the new drugs are developed in high-income countries, but they are probably not very useful for many of the other countries. And in particular, they are often not registered. So there is also an issue of registration there. So, yeah, sorry, that was maybe, yeah?
No, I think that was important, and I think the point that you're making is we don't need the necessarily, it's not the same devices you can use in LMIC settings that you can use in Europe.
The ways of working are so different also sometimes, that what you think is working in a 100% aseptic environment is going to be a little bit different elsewhere. So you need to take that into account. And if I may, another point I would like to raise, because you were mentioning about incentives for diagnostic, there is something that is never accounted for. We always look at the product, the miracle, the
Yes.
magic bullet.
Yeah.
That's the thing. But for software as medical device, you have to look at maintenance. You need to invest on maintenance. Otherwise, in 2 years, your product, has to leave the market. And actually, in MSF, we were looking at, the funders and the number of people who were funding maintenance. We didn't find any. So MSF today for Antibiotic, we have to update. It's also iterative. So we improve it based on experience. That's one important thing. And the second is we have to update it according to new regulations and so forth. And this is also an investment that has to happen. So if we want to have also small companies or even NGOs to become legal manufacturer, we need to take that into account as well.
Yeah. And I think I want to pick up what you just said, picking up on Pino, what you said with respect to the disease burden. I mean, one big risk that we are seeing with the pull incentives when they are implemented in high-income countries, they probably are going to incentivize companies to develop drugs for US patients, but not for the patients in Thailand. And these drugs may work in the US, but they may not work in Thailand, and they will not be adapted also to those settings. And that is where I think we also need to be, I mean, when we create incentives, we should create incentives that are addressing actually the AMR disease burden, and the AMR disease burden is mostly not in the US. And I think this is also something where we need to get the right balance. That's why I think we're on the right track with these push-pull I mean, the incentives plus the push funding, which is looking at needs where the most vulnerable populations are and the biggest medical needs. And with that, before we close, let's see whether there are any questions. Yeah, Victoria, yes? Yeah. Let me get the mic. Victoria.
Loud voice, I can project, but I just want to pull back to this. I'm probably the wrong person in the room for this. Victoria said I'm from Bielefeld University and I am a consultant with ICARS. But it's maybe a bit more of a political science question, I guess. We're in a situation where there's a lot of change in global health more broadly and in social portfolios and public funding and privatization and decolonization and neoliberalism. So kind of all of these types of changes are also happening, and AMR sits within that space, and antibiotic development sits also then specifically in that space. And coming to this question of, is our best strategy to invest and focus on global South innovation? I think one of the things that came very clear in for example, the pandemic, but also before that, the very successful maternal child health achievements we made during the MDG period, for example, is a lot of the innovation is coming in the South, and it's ignored by, all the high-income country institutions. It's ignored by, the UN has very limited ability sometimes to absorb those types of, including the World Health Organization, because it's not feeding up, and you have organizations that are innovating at the bottom. They are successful. They're trying to push up these innovations and these ideas and these needs and priorities and limitations, and there is a very little absorption capacity for the people in the top and the institutions in the top to actually receive that. And I just wondered if the panel could make a comment beyond all the technical aspects of AMR or antibiotic innovation and diagnostic innovation. What needs to change in terms of really creating our global institutional space so that we can be much more receptive to those types of things? Because that's one of the things I'm not seeing in AMR specifically, honestly spoken, I think is a particularly poor area compared to other areas of global health, I would argue. Excuse me, sorry.
Okay, with this thesis, it's a particularly poor area. I leave this to the panel.
So can I
who wants to pick it up? Glenda, and then I think
yeah.
you had the question. Glenda.
Yeah. So there is a lack of transparency in global procurement processes and maybe even GARDP. So if we had to have a end-to-end antibiotic or vaccine created in Africa, would GARDP guarantee us 10% procurement, or would PAHA? And so there has to be an incentive. So we can't make antibiotics or vaccines or therapeutics if the global procurement doesn't support people coming from the low middle income country settings or from the global south. And so we'll see this soon, because BioVac has developed the first end-to-end oral cholera vaccine, and if everything goes right, it should be able to be registered. And it'll be interesting to see whether GARDP procures it, and and whether it's just another self-fulfilling prophecy that we have global innovation in the south, but the global north controls the global procurement, and that would be a tragedy.
No, very, very quickly, maybe just to add, I think in terms of maybe financial weight is one thing for small entities, even NGOs, to, put a product on the market. For MSF, we had to work with a, notified body to do the auditing. And honestly, it took us ages to find one, and to find one that was capable to work with a small entity. So I think there is something that we need to look at, because otherwise you will have many entities developing probably amazing diagnostic or others, but that will never make it to the market, just because also the mechanisms and of course, the framework I was mentioning before, the regulatory pathway is one thing, but also because the entities that are in charge of doing the audit, I mean, don't even know how to deal with that. They know how to deal with blockbusters. They don't know how to deal with small entities. So that's certainly something to look at, to have probably different, funding mechanisms for when you're a small entity and when you're bigger, and have entities or audit entities that are in capacity to do that, because otherwise you will never have access to that as well. So,
and if I can just make one more, I think this point about the regulatory system globally is a real barrier to products from anywhere being acceptable anywhere, right? And we've heard that from small companies, from NGOs. You can't GARDP's, facing it now with 134, how to get categorical approved in 134 countries. And although it's not new, there's been lots of discussions that ICH is kind of inching forwards towards a harmonized. We're a long way away, really, from. And I just wonder whether we're in this time now where people are asking much bigger questions, whether we should really somehow try and step up the progress on this. I don't know what the answer is, and it's really hard. I think you said it brilliantly, that there's very fine scientific balance points, because we don't want to drop the quality level at all, of course. In fact, in many places we still need to raise it higher. And yet at the same time, we have to be honest, whoever you are, a big company as well, right? It's a big challenge. So it's not the only answer to your question by any means, but I do think we shouldn't lose sight of, there's a long way still to go on that.
Yeah. I have 3 questions. You're first, and then over there, and Ivo.
Hello, panel, and also the room. My name is Manchri. I'm the president of International Pharmaceutical Student Federation, and I'm originally from Thailand, so it's very honored to be hearing the very good case study today. So I'm a pharmacist by training, but working in diagnostics, so I'm hearing both conversation very roughly, and I started to realize that one question I would like to ask, after hearing all these evidence-based research, has it ever been recorded that we have evidence-based partnership recorded successfully, so that more sectors could potentially take after a good success in partnership? We have one who sell, one who test, one who also confirm whether the test is correct, one who also work in policy, and one who is collaborating on the same table. And if there could be a way forward that could suggest today that evidence-based partnership could work in AMR, and that we do not need to work in silo. Thank you.
Excellent question. I'll take this home to my organization. We're working on our theory of change and KPIs.
Kirsten Åkerfeldt with React. And we have been talking for a long time about the need to think differently and how to take on the challenge of this broken model and the end-to-end approach that we've been promoting, thinking about equitable access already from the beginning. So it's really inspiring to hear the panel today. I wanted to maybe take it to a theoretical and imaginative question, because we know also the trajectory of NCDs is not looking great. For example, cancer treatment is becoming, obviously increasing number of cancer cases, but also the difficulties in terms of patients having to also take antibiotics and being affected by antibiotic resistance to a much larger extent. And I'm wondering if, looking from an industry perspective, in terms of both, someone mentioned an ecosystem approach, and from an approach of sustainability of investments, as well as the risk management. And I'm wondering, is there a point where seeing actually incentives in investing in antibiotic resistance and, for example, translating to larger investment into the AMR Action Fund from an industry perspective, can it be seen as an incentive in itself for the sustainability of the business model, even though we believe strongly that we need alternative business models? But that's a question whether we can look at this from a much more holistic point of view, and is it a way to actually convince your shareholders that this is really necessary?
Thank you, Kerstin. Very interesting. I just read an interview with the CEO of Basilea, which is a Swiss-based company working on antibacterial treatments. Antifungal treatments is their specialty. And the CEO said that they have never been as well as today, because they have some products on the market, but also the public sector is bearing 70% of their R&D costs. And so there's a massive de-risking, and that's why the company can survive on relatively low sales. They don't have many blockbusters, I believe, but it seems that it can work. Yvonne, you want to
Just a bit of free advertising to say that the GLASS report is being released tomorrow in the morning. So if you want to look for the latest data on AMR with the 5 core messages and 5 implications, so I'm sure people will be interested to read that.
Yeah, thank you, Yvonne. And I also think that, you know, with all these difficult times you're going through, I think the new structure of the AMR department is really convincing. You retained the talent, so I really think that WHO keeps to be an important player in the future in AMR. With that, I think we have 5 minutes left. Back to you with these 3 questions. Who wants to? Manish, please.
I can take your question. So drug discovery is a highly collaborative, evidence-based process. Starting from beginning, it's not one person. It's such a big team of diversity. Starting from invention, it goes on till the regulatory. And even the regulators, especially for our molecule, the Indian regulators were very cooperative. They were asking us, okay, we have not done this before, right? So tell us what is that you need us to look at differently. So there is a continuous learning from both sides. So drug discovery is highly collaborative and evidence-based always, starting from ideation till the market.
I can say the same for the diagnostic. We didn't do it alone, actually. We developed it with, you know, clinicians, technicians, with people from MSF, with university researchers, and obviously with this, you know, audit entity who accepted basically to do the audit. So yeah. So I think it's always quite collaborative. Yeah.
I can talk to the
Kerstin.
Kerstin over there. Hi. So I think the way I would answer it is the Action Fund is quite unique, actually. I can't think of any other time where the whole industry's come together to invest into something collectively, because that's not really what companies do. And this was in response to what all 23 companies saw as an urgent issue because of the declining graph that we saw. But the point, and it's almost $1 billion that they did put in. The point was that it was clear that this wasn't going to sustainably solve the problem, which means I would be surprised, to be perfectly honest, if companies would be willing to reinvest in it. Some of them are in the room, you can ask them. But because our role, the way we really bring the value to the society is through the innovation part. And as Manish has illustrated, that's where we want to focus. That is, and that's on irrespective of what disease area it is. When it comes to antibiotics, we can do that, and we want to make the conditions right to do it. And this was avoiding or trying to slow the decline down, whilst governments around the world really delivered on their commitments that they've made in G7 for many years, etc. And we're pleased to see some progress there, but we really encourage it to continue.
Thank you, James. I think now we are reaching the end. Panel, any you want to all satisfied? Then
May I add one more?
Yes.
Yeah. I think I would like to explain one large challenge about antibiotic in our country. Because Thailand is a low-income country and our market is small. Even we have the new antibiotic, they don't want to sell it in our country. For example, cephidrocol is FDA approved in United States for several years. I have good experience when using cephidrocol for Acinetobacter baumannii in our country, but we wait for like 5 years for now, and it never reached our country. which need it much more than in United States because they can use dololobactam, sulbactam alone. Yeah. So I think we need help from your partnership again.
Yes, we can discuss with Shionogi and encourage them to file in Thailand as soon as possible. I really wanted to thank you. I think we really wanted to come up with a panel and tell you some encouraging stories. You know, success, something is happening. This is not all. It's not all so gloomy. They are actually really encouraging stories, and I think you shared some of those. Thank you so much. I'm pretty optimistic both with respect to the pull incentives, where we are making some progress. In Switzerland, they are going to discuss it in Parliament in November, so another country which may make its contribution. But also with what happens actually in countries like Thailand, India, South Africa. I think that's where my hope is also that we are going to see more innovation coming out of those hotspots of science actually. With that, I want to close. I was asked to tell the audience that there is the World Health Night. That's correct, in the pavilion. Yes, yeah. So it's tonight. There's the event. It's in the pavilion. I think it's when you go out and then write. That's where it is. So enjoy your evening. Thank you so much for joining.